King Saul. The story. The people of Israel demanded their leader and Israel's final judge, Samuel, provide their nation with a king, like the rest of the surrounding nations had. Samuel was angry with this request and prayed to God about the idea. God wasn't pleased with the idea either, but granted the Israelites' request and commanded Samuel to inform his people of his conditions. Samuel reported the requirements God demanded of his people, but they refused them in Samuel's words, further pushing Samuel to give them what they wanted. Samuel spoke with God again, who instructed Samuel to crown the king that God would choose. God chose Saul, the son of Kish, a tall, strong and handsome man from the tribe of Benjamin. Samuel first met Saul when he asked Samuel for help, as he and some of his family's servants were hunting for some donkeys that Saul's father Kish had lost. Samuel knew this man was God's chosen king because he received a message from God this time yesterday, informing him that he would meet Israel's king at the same time the following day. Samuel's suspicions were confirmed when God solidified this was him. Afterwards, Samuel reassured Saul the donkey was found and invited him to a feast where he privately informed Saul of his calling as Israel's first king, surprising him as he was from an insignificant family. The next morning, Samuel privately anointed Saul with oil, and God provided 3 signs to prove his kingship, as he was reluctant. God caused his spirit to fill Saul, caused Saul to prophesy with a group of musical prophets, and lastly the completion of the previous 2. While Saul was completing God's tasks, Samuel gathered the people and cast lots to reveal their king. Saul arrived at Mizpah but hid from the people since he was still afraid. Yet after hearing the people's loud and excited approval, he accepted this calling. Saul was crowned as Israel's first king at age 30. Saul's reign as king would begin with the invasion of Jabesh-Gilead in Manasseh east of the Jordan by the Amorite king Nahash. Nahash demanded the people of the city surrender to him, but refused to sign a covenant with the Israelites unless they allowed the Amorites to gouge out the right eye of each citizen. Messengers from Jabesh-Gilead fled to Saul and informed him of their troubles. At once Saul was filled with God's spirit and became furious about the Ammonites' actions. He immediately assembled an army of 300,000 Israelites and 30,000 from the tribe of Judah specifically, and swiftly defeated Nahash and the Ammonite forces, occupying Jabesh-Gilead. Saul and the Israelite troops offered sacrifices to God, thanking him for the victory. This victory solidified Saul as king and gained him more trust with the Israelite people. Following Israel's victory over the Ammonites, Samuel addressed his people for the last time as leader, since Saul was now fully established as Israel's king. In his speech, Samuel reminded them of their faithfulness to God throughout their history and encouraged them to remain on this path. He also warned them about the pathway they created by asking for a king, as God wasn't fully supportive of it, but reassured them he would continue to be Israel's prophet, praying for them to remind Israel and Saul to stay faithful to God's ways. Saul's next challenge came when a horde of Philistines, 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and many foot soldiers invaded Israel. Saul responded with 3,000 men. 2,000 followed him and stationed themselves in Michmash in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 with Saul's son Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin's territory. Saul, Jonathan, and the 3,000 defeated the Philistines, yet Saul severely disobeyed God. He offered the victory sacrifice before Samuel arrived, which seriously angered God, enough to strip the kingship from Saul. Samuel told Saul he would arrive at the battleground in Gilgal in 7 days, and wait to conduct the sacrifices until then. Saul and the Israelites waited 7 days, but Samuel didn't arrive. So some of the Israelites left and returned to their homes, and Saul believed Samuel wasn't coming, and made the sacrifice to God. Yet Samuel appeared immediately after he finished, and scolded Saul for his actions. Saul argued that if Samuel had kept his word, this wouldn't have happened. This was when Samuel announced God's change of heart towards Saul as king, deciding to transfer it to someone more faithful. Yet despite God's dethroning Saul, God still had work for Saul to complete as king while he decided who would succeed him. Through Samuel, God commanded Saul to destroy the Amalekites, both human and animals, for their past sins against Israel and God. Saul, with 200,000 soldiers from Israel and 10,000 from Judah specifically, defeated the Amalekites and refused the Canaanites living among them. Yet Saul didn't just spare the Canaanites, but the Amalek king Agag and his people's best livestock, which was against God and Samuel's command, as he was ordered to destroy anything related to the Amalekites. When Samuel saw that Saul had disobeyed God, he scolded him. Saul responded by claiming he had spared the best livestock to sacrifice to God for their victory, and Agag because he believed God commanded it. Samuel explained to Saul in more detail the sin he committed, and Saul begged Samuel to plead with God to pardon his sin, grabbing Samuel's robe and tearing one of the corners. However, Samuel refused and officially revoked Saul of his kingly duties on God's behalf and killed Agag before departing. Samuel and Saul didn't speak or see each other again until Saul's death, and God regretted anointing Saul as Israel's king. Digging deeper. We'll begin by exploring the two opposing views of Saul and his kingship from classical rabbinical literature, based on his story from 1 Samuel chapters 9 to 15. The first is that Saul was only crowned king by God because of his outward charm and good looks, not because of his merit as a leader. It claims Saul's grandfather is the reason Saul was made king, as according to this opinion, he was highly versed in the Torah, which was God's reward for his faithful dedication to his commands and teachings. Adding to this theory, I believe God chose Saul because he never desired Israel to have a king other than him, so presented his people one that pleased them by appearance, yet wasn't a strong enough leader to cause the Israelites to look to him and not God. However, when Saul started going rogue, God decided to remove Saul and select a king who wasn't as impressive on the surface, but was faithful and wouldn't turn from his commands, and if he did, God knew he would return and not fully travel along his own path. The second opinion looks at Saul in a kinder light. It states that Saul was a great leader and king. The first claim is about Saul's modesty about becoming king. He didn't believe he was worthy when Samuel first announced his destiny. Saul still didn't after God through Samuel provided 3 signs, only accepting when he heard the approval of his fellow Israelites. The second is his humaneness towards Israel's enemies, but strictness with his people. The third, Saul followed the rules of ritual impurity prescribed for the sacrifices and taught the Israelites how to butcher their cattle. And the fourth is during Saul's time as king, Israel didn't turn from God, and there was no idolatry within Israel's borders, painting a more sympathetic picture of Saul and his kingship. We'll finish by investigating the historicity of Saul and his kingdom. While all Christians believe Saul and his kingdom existed in history, those outside the faith aren't fully convinced. As of 2024, those who don't believe cite there are no other contemporary texts outside the Bible that mention Saul or his reign as Israel's king, with some concluding the biblical text is more literary than factual. However, 2 archaeological discoveries have been linked to Saul. The first is a rude fortress discovered in 1922 or 1933 at Tel Fu, the biblical city of Geber, connected to Saul by 1 Samuel 10:26. The other is in 2019. Archaeologists believe they have uncovered the biblical city of Ziklag, found in 1 Samuel 30. Although outside the Bible nothing is proving Saul's existence, there isn't anything that disproves it either. What to learn? What should we take away from King Saul's story? I believe it teaches us the dangers of unfaithfulness and disobedience towards God. Saul was introduced as a faithful and loyal servant to God. We first meet Saul while he and his servant are trying to help Saul's father find some donkeys who have escaped. This positive illustration of Saul continues with his first act as Israel's king, when he assembled an army to protect and defeat the Ammonites, harassing the residents of Jabesh Gilead in East Manasseh, and offering the required victory sacrifice to thank God, all gaining in popularity and favour with God and the Israelites. Yet after this, Saul began to disobey God. In his battles with the Philistines and Amalekites, Saul offered the victory sacrifice before Samuel arrived at Israel's battle with the Philistines, and spared the best livestock and King Agag in their conflict with the Amalekites. Although you could suggest Saul's arguments were reasonable, going ahead with the sacrifice after Samuel failed to appear in the promised time, saving the Amalekites' best livestock, not for himself but the sacrifice to God. Though true, the text counters this by stating because Saul directly disobeyed the command Samuel delivered from God to Saul, it showed Saul had grown prideful and believed he knew better than God. It showed Saul would follow the path he wanted and not the one God directed. This proved to God that Saul wasn't suitable for king. God wanted someone loyal and faithful to him in his commands and ways, someone who would turn and look to him in every situation, and in the end that wasn't Saul. How does this apply to us today? Like Saul, God gives us callings and opportunities throughout our lives. On these pathways, God expects us to remain faithful and humble towards him, and not grow prideful when enjoying the success they bring. Many of us start like Saul, humble and obedient, listening and acting on what God wants. But after a while we tend to forget God and grow arrogant, as Saul did at the end of his reign. Use Saul's story as a warning, and when you believe you might be slipping, turn to God and allow him to lead you back on the pathway to glory.